Hello class, this is going to be the final lecture. I could do 2 or 3 lectures in this last section, but 9 lectures is long enough for you guys, so I don't want to exasperate you, especially when I don't have a good recording system yet that will be able to enhance and illustrate what is being said. So I'm wanting to stay to the very narrow and succinct explanation. So what have been the Hindu responses to these challenges, internal and external challenges? The first one that I like to bring up is Vivekananda. Vivekananda was a Advaita Vedanta. He was an absolute non-dualist. And Vivekananda, if you look at that picture, he lived only for about 40 years, but he did something that the West had not yet encountered. Western superiority over the rest of the world was so immense and so baffling and so staggering that they almost thought that not much good can be found outside of Western Europe and Christianity. And what Vivekananda does is he shows up in Chicago at a conference in the 1900s. And what he does is that he gives them an explanation of what Hindus truly believe, beyond just the vulgar polytheistic conception that you may get by looking at some of those Hindu temples. I mean, some of them are just so sexually explicit, you will for sure not not conceive of that as non-rated material. They are just exaggerated genitalia and multiple colors and animals and humans, and it's just so for most Westerners, they were not acquainted with the depth of thought that India had to offer. Vivekananda came in at a pivotal time. This is 1900, remember. Protestants and Catholics have been fighting for now 400 years. There are all sorts of religious dissension. There are all sorts of wars that have occurred. Maybe the Napoleonic Wars, maybe Revolutionary Wars, a lot of bloodshed, a lot of continuous conflict within the West and outside of the West. And Vivekananda, for the first time, exposed Westerners to the idea of this syncretistic view of truth, where all truths lead to one, all paths lead to the divine, and all paths are equally true, and there is no reason to fight for the truth, or to die for the truth, or to kill for the truth. We can all get along by respecting our differences and allowing the truth to speak through each one of our traditions and religions. So he kind of gave him more of that historical understanding of Hinduism, which truly shaped in perceptions about Hindus from what was previously believed to now a well-educated English-spoken thinker who was able to summarize Advaita Vedanta to the West. Then you have the Aryan Samaj movement, which is of course the fundamentalists going back to the Vedas mentality. We need to depart from any of this tradition we learn of formal government and just simply be reinstituted into the way it was and go back to the gurus and recite in the Vedas and so on. And then the Brahmo Samaj movement, which was more an adopter perspective. Bring up literacy, bring up the English language. We need to have one unified language for all of India because there are hundreds and hundreds of dialects and languages. Therefore, we need to all learn literacy. We need to all go to school. We need to all be employed in secular activities like jobs for both male and female, and so on. And then you have Mahatma Gandhi. Now, I bring up Gandhi because Gandhi was an extremely influential person in the 20th century and revolutionary in Hindu thought. Now, just to give you a sense, Mahatma Gandhi was not killed for political reasons, and he was not killed by a Muslim. Given the extensive conflict between Hindus and Muslims in India, he was killed by a Hindu. And the reason is because he was challenging the Varna Ashrama Dharma system and the caste system. And that was not to be tolerated. He wrote an autobiography, so if you want to know more about him, there is a great movie that was done in the 1980s. Highly recommend it. And then you can also read his book, which is Experiments with Truth, the story of my life, of my experiments with truth, and that is the many ways in which truth has become revealed to him. So Mahatma Gandhi, I will explain two aspects about him. I have 10 minutes. Two aspects about his life. One is his influence on religion and his influence in politics. So Mahatma Gandhi is going to practice this himself. He truly believed that it was the obligation of every human being to read the sacred scriptures of other peoples. And by that I mean read it. Actually pick it up and start on chapter 1 and then all the way through the end. So he says it is a sacred duty that we have as human beings to be able to do that to one another. Then he also speaks about the transcendence of truth, which means not one religion or one perspective is true, but all perspectives are paths to the divine. And I have a quote here by him. He says, is the God of the Muslim different from the God of the Hindu? He says, religions are different roads converging on the same point. What does it matter what way you go different roads as long as you arrive at the same destination? So he had a conception of truth that was far encompassing and that transcended our limited distinctions. He was opposed to religious conversion because it created too many problems. And remember, why do you have to become a Hindu? Hinduism is just one more path to the divine. If you're born a Christian, then be a Christian. If you're born a Jew, then be a Jew. Ultimately, you will come to realize that. He was the first one. He followed Leo Tolstoy, and then he actually put it into practice where Tolstoy did not, is peaceful non-resistance. And peaceful resistance or non-violence. And he used very unconventional, I mean, he used something that was extremely successful, and that was his moral stature and the respect that he gained in the eyes of others. He used that to bring attention to issues and to resolve them. And so what you're going to have, he used very unorthodox ways of fighting. You know, ordinarily when you are fighting an empire like the British, what you do is that you engage in what's called guerrilla warfare. You try to find some asymmetrical way of inflicting the most damage upon that the British Empire, either by public opinion or by blowing yourself up or by torturing or by whatever. That's an old practice. It's been there, and that's usually the response. But what you're going to have here is Mahatma Gandhi is going to employ things like fasting. Who was going to think that that could be a weapon? Getting yourself get beat up and letting others see that and the cruelty that goes on, so that you can gnaw at their conscience, so that they can reflect and say, who are the animals? Who are the brutal ones here? Is it the Hindu people, or is it the British soldiers that are willing to inflict this kind of pain and suffering on women and men? So who is abandoning humanity? He believed that proverbial saying about think globally, act locally. The same thing goes for community. We are part of this, the metropolitan conception of a citizen of the world that Alexander the Great developed. Mahatma Gandhi was the same thing. All of humanity is one family, and he at some point in his life, after having children, decided to dedicate himself to righting the wrongs of society, and by doing so he needed to spend his entire attention doing that, and he committed himself to celibacy. So he never had sexual intercourse with his wife again. One very important thing about Mahatma Gandhi is that time and time again during his life, he's able to make a moral commitment and keep it. The only time he didn't, and he regretted it, and he had nightmares about it, was when he went to England and his mom promised him to not eat meat, and he promised to his mom that he was not going to eat meat, and he ate lamb, and then he saw that poor little lamb crying, it's in bleeding in his sleep, and he was horrified by that dream, and he never ate meat again. So he usually tried to, if he gave his word, he would live by it. and that's very admirable in Gandhi. And then, of course, a revolution begins in the home. Uh, you take a vow, fasting and vegetarianism, and that's the path he followed. And then of course, he began to use this concept of ahimsa, which was developed by the Jainists, and that is non-violence. And one of the advantages that Gandhi had is he was fighting the British Empire. Now, I don't know that this would have been successful with the Soviets or Hitler or Mussolini or anybody like that. But he was fighting the British, and the British had a more civilized conception of the human person and their background, and trying to do things by consent and persuasion. They did use force in some cases very ruthlessly, but not to the extent that others would do. And so what Gandhi tried to do is try to awaken the British conscience by exposing the irrationality of force. And so massacres and shootings and beating up and things of that. And he will, he would occasion some of those things. Like, for example, there was an agreement between special protections, of course, in trade done by Parliament to specific companies, and one of them was the Hindus did not have any right to their own salt. They had to buy it from the British, a specific company, so a lending of a monopoly. And anybody who was found collecting salt was to be prosecuted and put in jail. Well, Gandhi led the movement, and then they went down to the beach and began to collect salt. And of course, the soldiers were waiting for them, and then they were beating them up. And the Hindus, in this case, the followers of Mahatma Gandhi, they just simply lined up and took it time after time until they were just bleeding and in pain, and others got to see that, and those things got televised and on radio, and others became aware of it, and they became quite disgusted, and dissent grew. And so that was just a part of raising consciousness and awakening the light of every human being to be able to make sense of this. And he was successful in the end. He was able to shape and transform and use British and Western doctrines and teachings against themselves. Remember, Mahatma Gandhi was educated in England, and he was a lawyer. And so he knew the West quite well. He lived there. And so what you see in Gandhi is a revolutionary figure both in religion as well as in politics. When he was beginning his process after he finished in South Africa, which he spent almost 2 decades working for racial equality there, he moved to India, and then of course some wealthy British and Indian people wanted him to lead this crusade against the British, and they had a political meeting, and of course all the upper middle class went and showed up, and they wanted him to do it in English. And Mahatma Gandhi says, no, this is a revolution that entails the whole people, so I am going to speak in my own language. And that made him an outsider. He's breaking with convention, but he's trying to reach out to every human being to come to awake and take responsibility for their own future. And he fought for peace in India, and he opposed the separation between Pakistan and India, between Muslims and Hindus, and that was a very, very painful process for him to see and undergo. To see Hindus and Muslims kill each other in the thousands. But nonetheless, he kept at it. He opposed the caste system. He forced his own wife to clean latrines. He created communes where people would come and live, and whether you were an untouchable or a Kshatriya or a Brahmin didn't matter. You can all live there and be treated equally, and you should treat your children and the children of others as if they were your own. So there was this whole sense of act locally, think globally, and revolution begins in one's own village. So I will stop at this point right here. There's much more to be said, but I think this is sufficient for you guys. And if you want more sources or ideas, contact me, and I can gladly provide you with text and movies or documentaries. Okay, bye.